So it sounds like, at least to me, it sounds like we're at a bit of an inflection point in the development of privacy in Canada. So as we're leaning towards more stringent requirements, as we're all apparently welcoming more direct, more effective privacy legislation and regulations, what should businesses take away in general from those trends, and specifically from our event today? What should they walk away with, starting with policies, of course, but really if they go back and they do a lot of thinking, what are the first few steps that they need to go through to be able to start to get it right? Mr. Constantine.
Okay. So getting accountability right is a good starting point, ironically. But also thinking about who your audience is. If you're a business and you, again, I tend to work with a lot of service providers, and they tend to use, maybe your clients use NIST or ISO or want to SOC 2, then that's a basis for a framework. Because remember, picking a framework should communicate effectively what your controls are and that they're effective. And so starting with the framework, because I often say to my clients at the beginning of any project around developing a program, it looks intimidating when you try to think about, eating an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So take it apart, put it into a framework, look at the individual activities, prioritize, because you're not going to do everything at once. That's what makes people, again, go into the fear and loathing mode. They just see this massive project in front of them. You got to break it down. And again, focus on things. If you are a retailer and you're primarily on the web, you want to look at your notice. You want to figure out how you're going to be managing consent. That's kind of like the priority. If you're a service provider, those aren't the things you may need to focus on. But point being, you've got to map this to your business. This is why the template approach doesn't work. You'll often be dragged down directions you probably don't need to or may not need to do for a while. So again, it's really important to break it down, focus on what the elements are that support you doing the right thing in your business, given the nature of the data that you're managing. And also, again, keeping in mind who your audiences are. Your audiences are consumers, they're business clients, they're the regulator. And think about how you want to communicate convincingly that you're doing the right thing, or at least you're on the path.
Yeah, and Constantine, the framework is such a great point that you're making, and this is actually what we're teaching right now in our course. But we're talking about frameworks because eating that elephant is difficult, but you also communicate to your entire company how to eat that elephant. It is a unified language that you speak with everyone. It's a unified language for risk as well. So then you can have allies, and IT starts to understand what you're saying, and InfoSec starts to understand what you're saying, and other people start to understand because you're speaking from the same language repository.
Sure. Establishing a common language is certainly a key to success in security. And of course, it's taken a lot for Canadian businesses to understand some of that. What I've noticed, again, from a cybersecurity standpoint, is that the public, in the case of within the context of privacy, data subjects take their cue from service providers, from companies. So they almost trust them until they're given a chance not to trust them. Mm-hmm. They see them as the expert. So if you go to a website and you're a regular person, you take your cue from the way these people come across, and you just assume that they know more about privacy than you do, and you just assume that they're going to take care of you unless you do something to erode that trust. So in some cases, that trust has been misplaced. As some of you have said, there have been pivotal moments in the past decade that have caused some of that trust to falter, but also caused the public to increase their awareness and vigilance about who they're sharing personal information with. So What are some of the tips that you've got? Let's say, Derek, what are a couple of tips that organizations can do right now? And then we'll go to Vance.
I love it. So if you look at the way Quebec laid out their coming into force, it's brilliant because it allows corporations and organizations to eat the elephant one bite at a time. They said this September, the CEO being accountable, the highest authority in the company being accountable, is coming into force, and the breach notification, or they call it confidentiality incident reporting. That whole planning, including a registry, has to be in place this September. So they're saying, here are your first 2 bites. So any organization that waits until December to start worrying about it, it's too late. You could get fined for not having your confidentiality incident reporting planning in place. And I'm pretty sure, given that they made these 2 things the first coming into force, I'm pretty sure you're going to see some pretty rich fines to direct CEOs coming out of the gate, out of Quebec. And it's because they want to actually underline that accountability, and that the accountability lies with the highest authority in the organization. They put that in the law intentionally. And I think I think that we just have to start paying attention and start leaning in, and just one piece at a time start to put a good practices in place. And I think, as Constantine said, eating an elephant one bite at a time, start taking bites.
Vance, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, I'm kind of repeating some of Constantine's point of figure out what you are measuring against. So being in regulator's office, I can tell you, if somebody kind of says, prove that you have the appropriate security practices, and you can say, okay, well, here's how we certify against ISO, here's how we certify against SOC 2, like that's incredibly powerful for us. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. So again, identifying whether it's guidance from the regulators of how to actually meet your criteria, or industry guidance or certifications, working through, okay, how can I best essentially prove my compliance? Because again, this is something that you'll see in emerging legislations. It's almost certainly going to be in C11 replacement. If Ontario ever moves forward with something, it'll be in there, where you're getting more promotion of things like codes of conduct, codes of practice. European Data Protection Board just issued its first advice on certification criteria for things like a data protection seal. So, like, to me, those are the kinds of things that we're really looking for. Are those defined frameworks of how to how to evaluate compliance? Because it's hard for regulators even to look at to go through an unstructured privacy program and make a determination of whether it's compliant or not. So yeah, look at those, and again, get as those kind of things get introduced into law, maybe start having discussions within your industries of if there isn't a code of conduct, or if there isn't a standardized way of compliance, maybe you can start developing one. Maybe you can start, kind of coming together to work through a proposal of, here's what we think compliance looks like. Regulators, what do you think about that? There's going to be those kind of opportunities to develop frameworks. So yeah, again, the bottom line is just figure out how you're going to prove compliance, and ideally prove it against a known standard.
Brilliant. I love the point about having discussions within your own industry, because there's so much siloing that I'm seeing, where people just see competition everywhere. And so they bring up their walls and their defenses, and they say, you know what, we'll ask we'll ask our advisors to tell us what those guys are doing, instead of just simply reaching out and creating a working group or some kind of a regular opportunity to share information. So I'm hearing you all saying that education, enforcement, focus, and of course, these open discussions are ways to move forward. Amalia, what are some of your tips from your vantage point?
It's always nice to be last, because you hear everything, what everyone says, and you get so
That's right.
inspired.
You can copy. You can copy.
I don't want to copy, but I want to say I'm very inspired. Constantine, I'm not copying. I want to say, and it's been said, but I want to say it loud, prove it. That's what's the next accountability 2.0 is, prove it. It's not going to be enough to just have the right intention. And this is why, folks, we have huge advocacy groups out there, like Schrems, None of Your Business, Electronic Frontier. There's so many advocacy groups out there. I mean, why is Google in court in California? Because Google was tracking, even though you put yourself in incognito mode in Chrome. It's because of these advocacy groups. Why do we know about Google Analytics and Google Fonts? Because of these advocacy groups. So everything is out in the open. You can't hide behind good intentions anymore. You got to prove it.
Excellent. Fantastic. So,
and if I could just quickly build on
please.
that,
Yeah,
I
by all
say
means.
the other thing, it's not just about advocacy groups. The government would desperately love to promote innovation. The government desperately wants to create a legislative framework that allows for additional sharing of data within certain privacy frameworks. So, you know, where you know, if we're stepping back on consent or something like that, there's going to be, you know, there's going to have to be something that fills in the gap, and accountability is going to be that piece. Mm-hmm. So again, the stronger industry accountability practices can be, the more comfort the government can have kind of advancing a legislation along those lines that kind of says, you know, we can base a lot of data sharing on, you know, truly demonstrable accountability. So, you know, it's not just about avoiding the negatives. It's about finding new ways to be able to use data.
Absolutely. I think we're going to leave it here. We're at the top of the hour. As everyone can see, our august set of panelists is or are full of anecdotes. Their knowledge and their wisdom runs deep. So by all means, oh, please, or something. Please do follow them on LinkedIn or elsewhere. Perhaps not in real life, because that would be stalking, but
yes.
You know, on social media, I think is fair, especially given the pandemic. You want to keep your distance.
And we have more of these events coming, folks. So if you want to know more about
absolutely,
privacy.
yeah, no. We'll be posting this particular event. We're going to extract some key sound bites from our panelists, and by all means, share some of the next events as you see them coming across your news feed. The next one will be March 10th, and after that will be on March 30th. We're going to have at least a couple of these per month on very important topics. And I want to thank our panelists here for today. It's certainly been insightful. It's been great for me, and I hope every one of you has got value from spending the time with us today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for lunch. It was a nice lunch.
That's right. I hope it was a nice lunch. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.